So speaking of churn walls, why not just decrease churn? This would be the simple way to kind of move the goalpost in terms of how far you can grow before you hit a churn wall, right? Because if your churn today is, say, 20% and you have that to 10%, well, then you've doubled how far you can go. Or just to put it in concrete terms, say you've got 1,000 clients and you're churning 20% per year. Well, that's 200 clients you're losing per year. So you got to sell at least 200 just to stay in the same place. You can get that down to 10% or 100 clients, then you can keep on growing at the same sales pace. Or put another way, you could get all the way up to 2,000 clients before you were losing 200 per year. So it raises the threshold where the flat line of the churn wall kind of hits you. So of course, everyone wants to decrease churn. Nobody wants churn. But it's worth understanding, what different levels of churn mean. And so I'll start at the top with 50% churn. That means one of two things. It might mean that your product is intermittent in its usage. So a client comes in and they use it, and even though you're kind of set up for SaaS or recurring revenue, in actuality, maybe they just use it for a couple of months, they get the value they need, and then maybe they'll come back in the future. But it's not actually a recurring revenue product. And so that I would call the faux ARR issue. This is the big one. There's a lot of companies that will look at annual revenue and they will conflate that with annual recurring revenue. And so that's a potential issue. If your churn levels are this high, maybe it's not actually a recurring product and maybe something needs to change from a product perspective or delivery perspective to make it recurring so that clients would want to or need to stick around. The other potential issue if your churn levels are this high is just that you don't really have product market fit. And, that can be a tough pill to swallow, but if half your customers are leaving every year, let's just be honest, you don't have product market fit. And you need to get to a level of retention that shows that clients are coming in and they're sticking around because they value what you have. And so this is a sign of poor product market fit. So how do you solve that? Well, this is a very fundamental challenge. Actually, I would say that both of these are very fundamental challenges in terms of either you're not truly a recurring revenue product or service, or you just don't have the product market fit you need. That's the issue up there. And of course, that's going to bedevil you until you get that under control. A very strong sales organization might be able to extend the runway, but at the end of the day, that's got to get fixed. When you get into this middle range of 25%, maybe you're somewhere in between sort of like this good level and the obvious lack of product market fit kind of levels. There it gets squishier. So here it could be an issue of customer success, could be an issue of onboarding, training, activation of customers. Essentially, at these kinds of levels, maybe you can work around the margins and you can push down, your goal would be to use customer success and to use, it might be feature oriented. Oftentimes it's not at that level, but use customer success and improvement. Some of that may be agentic these days. So actually improve the help, customer success, onboarding, knowledge experience so that folks can get value so that you get down here. And when you get down here to 10 to 15% churn, I've done this myself before, where looking at the company and looking at specific cases of churn, I would say that, oh man, we could have kept so-and-so, and we could have kept this client, we could have kept that client, and why did, this firm leave? And if we had just done that, look how much higher our revenue would have been. And then you get into these sort of coulda, shoulda, woulda games. If at the end of the day, your gross churn is, in that 10 to 15%, which is really around 1% a month, because these are all annual numbers. So if you're at that level, you're not really churning that bad. And in fact, I would argue that the churn problem has largely been solved. And so this is not probably the place where you're going to have the most success in terms of moving the needle. In fact, if you have 10 to 15% gross churn tied to positive net revenue retention on your best clients, and so your best clients are buying more, you might actually find that your numerical churn is 10 to 15%, but your dollar churn might actually be zero when you include like growth within clients. It might actually be negative. So you're actually expanding on net, and then that's not the issue that you think it is. But anyway, big picture, you can get churn down to a certain extent, but once you get down into the 10 to 15%, call it 1% a month, or a little higher than that, down into those mid-teens, the low-hanging fruit has probably been picked, and you're better off moving to other techniques, as we'll see.